the cemetery and the monument in Gettysburg. I'm here, I've been invited to rehearse that talk, that speech that I gave 150 years ago this afternoon, about 2,200 miles from here in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. My eyes are also 205 years old, so I need to correct some of the misunderstandings of that address. First of all, I didn't consider it an address. It was simply I was invited to give a short dedication at the end of the meeting. It had been a wonderful meeting. This song had been sung for the first time. There was a wonderful prayer that brought me to tears, given by Reverend T.H. Stockton. And then the real Gettysburg address was given by a man by the name of Edward Everett. Now, Mr. Everett was an orator. He was a great orator. In fact, he was probably one of the greatest of his time. It was before movies and before recording artists. You could consider him maybe a movie celebrity. And he told the story of the Gettysburg battle, talking about the brave men giving their lives. It was very emotional and touching. And as was the tradition of the day, it went on for 2 hours. I won't go on for 2 hours. There were some other misconceptions. Somebody got the idea that I wrote my talk on the back of an envelope as I was sitting in the audience. I'd written most of it in Washington before I boarded the train the night before to come to Gettysburg. I finished it in the home where I was staying. It was the Wills home, David Wills. I finished it there with the help of my Secretary of State. He added some of the words, not many, but a few. The morning of the dedication was spent touring the grounds. It was very emotional for me. And this is probably where some of the idea came that I wrote on the back of an envelope. Because after I toured, I was struck and I felt I needed to make some changes. So I made a few changes. I was also not very fond of giving extemporaneous speeches. But I added a few things as I spoke. Most notably were the words unto God. Because it had been a marvelous day. It was a beautiful day. And so, after 150 years, some of my political foes even called my short talk silly. And it took them this 150 years to finally consider those words this very week. But as such, I would like to again repeat these words. There's several different versions floating around, so I'm going to read the official version that I signed and gave and became part of a book that Mr. Everett, the great orator, created. And had it not been for that, he would probably never even know I'd said those words. But these, here they are. 77 years ago, I need to add, stop that ad right there. As you know, I'm very well read, and I often called upon the Bible to help me with my talks. And that came, those words, not the right same years, but those words came from Psalms, the 90th Psalms, verse 10. We talked about fourscore. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war. to stop again. This occurred just 4.5 months after the battle. There were fresh graves, the mounds of the graves as we toured. And it was a very touching scene. And the Civil War was far from over. History has shown that that battle was the turning point of the war. But it was far from over. And so please, the rest of my words make sense to you. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who would give their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth, freedom, and a government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.